In this video, I'll be demonstrating how to install Python on Windows and how to install Visual Studio Code with Python on Windows. To begin with, let's navigate to python.org. On the Python homepage, there's a download section that lists the latest release. We click on that. Below the release notes, there will be a Files section. In the Files section, we want to find our operating system, and in this case, it's a Windows 64-bit installer. We're going to choose the executable. After the installer has downloaded, we can launch the installation process. And at this point, there are a few changes to the default installation that I would suggest that you make. The first thing that we want to do is set Python within our environment variables. That's quite easy to do. All we have to do is check this box for add Python 3.8 to path. The next thing we want to do is we want to shorten this installation location. This is just too long, too hard to find. So we do a custom installation. Most of the checkboxes here are perfectly fine, and we can click next. We don't have to change any of these boxes, and all we have to do is change the install location. I'll click Browse. My suggestion is that you do something within your user on Windows here. So I find my user here, I expand that out. Now, I would create a new folder here and call it Python. I happen to already have one. So I'm going to select that, and then once I have that selected, I would create a new folder again, and I would call that Python 38. And that gets us the Python directory for this installation. So once you have your user Python 38 directory, we can click OK. And now you can see this is the full path to the installation of our Python 38. So I click Install, and the installer will handle the rest. Once the installation is complete, we click Close. And now Python has been installed on our system. To verify that everything worked correctly, go into your Windows search bar and type in Command Prompt to launch the terminal. Within the terminal, we can check that Python was assigned to an environment variable correctly by typing in Python and hitting Enter. If Python was installed correctly, we should see the Python version, as well as this triple arrow to indicate that we are in the Python shell. Any command that we give to the Python shell will be executed by the Python interpreter, and the output will be printed to the screen. So for example, if I do 100 plus 200, Python will evaluate that expression and print. Okay, now that we've verified that Python was installed correctly and we have access to the Python interpreter in the shell, we can close this terminal, and let's look at the code editor that was included with the installation of Python. That's IDLE. To find that, go into your Windows search and type in IDLE. Now, in my case, I actually have two versions because I've previously installed Python 3.7 on this machine. But if you've only installed one, you should only see idle one time. If you have multiple installations, try to select the one that corresponds with the version you just installed. In this case, it's Python 3.8. So I'm going to select that, and it's going to launch. Now you'll notice this looks very similar to the Python shell that we saw in terminal. In fact, it's basically the same thing, but this is just a convenient place to open up a shell and give Python commands. One added feature though is that the IDLE comes with a text editor. So if I do File, New File, it's going to open a text editor, and I can write Python code in this file, and when I run that code with the Run Module button here, or press F5, it's going to execute back in the Python shell on the left here. So let's demonstrate that. If I do x equals 100, y equals 200, print x plus y, we should see the result 300 printed out onto the shell. And just because it's so common, we're also going to print out hello world. Hello world is a string, so we put it in the quotation marks. Okay, now I can click Run. going to ask me to save this file before it runs. And the reason is, in order for the interpreter to read this file, it has to be saved onto my file system first, and then the Python interpreter will read it back into the shell. So I click OK, and I'm just going to overwrite this old one and call it my file. Okay, now you can see that that file executed. On top of that, we also get to see where that file was read out from. And the other thing is, one interesting feature of IDLE is that it takes us back to the shell. After our code executes, we're still in the shell, which means I still have access to variables that were defined at the end or termination of my program. So I have X and Y here. So if I type in X and hit enter, I get 100. Type in Y, I get 200. There are some drawbacks though to IDLE. It's not very robust for larger projects. There's no file explorer. And for that reason, I recommend Visual Studio Code. So I'm going to demonstrate how to install Visual Studio Code. We'll close out of IDLE, go back into our browser and look for Visual Studio Code. We're going to click on the download, come over to Windows, and we're going to install this just for this user on a 64-bit machine. The installation begins. Once the download begins, once the download is complete, we can begin installation. I'm not going to change the location of VS Code. I don't actually interact directly with it very often. Most of the time it's just open and we work with other folders in our system. Here on the options menu, there's several things that I suggest you add. Desktop icon is really up to you. It depends on what your workflow is, whether you like that. These two, in my opinion, are important. They allow you to quickly open project folders and files in Visual Studio Code without having to navigate additionally through VS Code. We can just find them on our file system, right-click for the context menu, and then open them. It's very useful. Registering as an editor for supported file types, this can be useful, and we're going to leave this add to path here. So I click next, then install. While that's installing, I'm going to set up a project directory. So I'll open my folder, my file system, navigate to my documents, and here I have one already set up, but let's demonstrate a new one. So I'll do File, New, Folder, and this is going to be a new project. Now let's go back and look at the installer. It says it's complete, so I can click Finish. And here we are. This one has already opened with some files in it, so we can close those out. All right, once Visual Studio has opened, I can then navigate with Open Folder. In my documents, I can find a new project. Click Select Folder. That's going to open the project here. Now, if I didn't know exactly how to navigate there, but I had it open in my Windows Explorer, what I could do is right-click on a new project and find Open with Code. And that's why we wanted to add it to the context menu. This is very useful to get to our projects quickly. So I can open that, and again, it opens it. And you can see right here in the Explorer, I have a new project right there. The next thing is we need to configure Visual Studio Code to work with Python. So we go to the extensions, and we would type in, you can see I have it enabled, but if you don't, we would type in Python in the search, you'd find Python and click Install. Once the installation of the extension is complete, you can come back up to your project in the File Explorer, click New File, call this a Python file.py. Notice that as soon as I type in .py, it changes the icon, showing you that VS Code recognizes that it's a Python file. Within the Python file, I can type the same code I had before, or any other script that I want to use. So x equals 100, y equals 200, print x plus y, print hello world. Now we're going to run this in terminal using this green button up here. You can see it launches a terminal here, and this is very similar to the command prompt that we used before. The next thing I want to do is I want to look at how can I make it easier to run this in terminal. If I look at the Run menu, you can see that I don't have a Run in Terminal button here. So what I suggest you do is do Control-Shift-P to open the command palette, do keyboard shortcuts, and we're going to open keyboard shortcuts. Within keyboard shortcuts, I want to look for Run File in Terminal, and by default there will be no key binding on here. So I would suggest you double click on that and then select the key binding of your choice. If the key binding already has existing bindings, you want to make sure that they don't have any conflict. In other words, at the time when you want to execute the Python file in terminal, the other key bindings for F5 or whatever key you choose should not be able to run that file as well. So if I look in here, I can see that it was already set in my case to run file in terminal and to debug continue. So debug continue doesn't actually do anything when I'm trying to run the file in terminal. So I'm going to leave those two on F5. You can set it to anything you prefer, anything that works for you. And then I'm going to come back here, press my shortcut key, and you can see it runs in the terminal. There are a lot of other features available for VS Code, and some really useful ones for working with Jupyter Notebooks and other data science applications. But those are the basics of getting things set up, and I hope you liked this video. If you wouldn't mind subscribing or hitting that like button, I'd really appreciate it. Thanks. Bye.